The production of meat on a mass scale only pretty much satisfies the world's demand for flesh, but at what cost? And what's changing? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. It's a daily staple throughout much of the world. Global meat consumption per person doubling since the 1960s, but the world's natural resources are struggling to keep up with the scale of intensive meat production. And there are many now who say it could lead to environmental disaster if we can't reduce our intake. Meat, dairy, eggs, staples of the human diet throughout history. But with growing populations, the demand for animal produce is at unprecedented levels, and it's taking its toll on the environment. Does the world need to rethink its relationship with meat and its byproducts? Factory farming has led to unsustainable practices. Deforestation to feed and house animals is hollowing out the world's forests.
Não existe necessidade de se desmatar mais nada para que a gente...
O Brasil tem muita terra já aberta.
Nuestro país ya perdió el 70% de los bosques nativos originales.
Cleared land quickly becomes degraded, the soil eroded. Every minute we lose 30 soccer fields worth of arable land to intensive farming. A senior UN official saying the Earth's topsoil may only last another 60 years. Cause for concern with 95% of the world's food grown in soil. Soy has become the cash crop of choice.
10 años, el avance de la soja en Argentina ha desplazado a la ganadería de suelos que ahora son aptos para la agricultura. Estamos hablando de cerca de 5 millones de hectáreas.
But it isn't farmed simply for human consumption, it's a staple used largely for animal feed, a process which is a drain on valuable resources like land and water. Producing 1 kilogram of beef requires about 58 times more water than 1 kilogram of potatoes. Pollutants can have devastating consequences. Algal blooms can happen when wastewater from agriculture stimulates an overgrowth of algae, which dies and sucks the oxygen from the water. And animal waste releases greenhouse gases that can be hundreds of times more potent than carbon dioxide. Population growth is expected to worsen the crisis. The global population estimated to reach 9.8 billion in 2050 and 11 billion by 2100. And demand for meat is growing in fast developing economies such as India and China. Science is offering an alternative.
The technology is there. We can make a piece of meat outside of the cow using cow cells.
Cultured meat or in vitro meat grown in a laboratory that has never seen or been part of an animal. Ultimately, the impact our diet has on the environment is down to us. But is the world prepared to eat less meat to improve the planet? Or is it too entrenched in our lives to give up? Joining me at the round table today, Richard McGowan, the first chef in history to cook with in vitro lab-grown meat. We have Lufti Radwan, a farmer and a former rural development consultant. With me to my left is the environmental journalist John Vidal, and also at the table the vegan activist Ian Solomon Kowal. Thank you all very much. Look, a first for me, no notes. I just want to listen and learn today. And we can all ask each other questions, okay? So don't wait for me, just jump in if you want to. Richard, the first person ever to do this, what on earth is in vitro meat?
So in vitro meat is food that's produced or grown but outside of the animal, ultimately. So it's grown in a petri dish.
It's real meat?
It's real meat, yep. Genetically, 100%.
How?
How? So they take a stem cell, they identify one, and they give it a destiny, ultimately. So they're using a little bit of electricity, some saline solution, sugar.
Frankenstein.
Almost, they say. Preferably, I would say this is a very clean and controlled environment. It's not alive in, it doesn't have feelings in the same way you would have a small animal, but it certainly is genetically the same as any animal cell.
I know you wanted to ask some questions as well. You were raring to go before the programme.
The taste is I mean, it's added, isn't it? I mean, there is no taste to that meat. You have to add taste to it.
Not necessarily.
You can dial the taste up, can you?
Yes, it's a lot of flavour, particularly in red meat products, comes from fat, and the meat products that are being produced are purely meat or protein at this stage. So it has a very, very subtle taste. It doesn't have an artificial taste. It just tastes like very lean top side of beef, perhaps.
Is it pulsing like a muscle? Is it?
No, not at all, not at all. These are grown for 8 to 9 weeks in the lab. Each cell is actually scaffolded, it's actually called. It's the technique of hooking a little diodes through the edge of the cell. So that's all done by hand. And the pulse actually comes from the electricity, as you say.
And how long was the research done before it was actually put into the marketplace? How long?
It was about a 6-year research project.
Okay.
Yeah, is this any more acceptable to you?
No, it sounds disgusting. It just
Discussing
sounds...
because of the idea or because
Well,
you
no,
really
because
think of it as meat?
I think because there's, when we talk about, to me, it's the most extreme form of capitalism in terms of actually producing meat just for the consumer. But there's many factors that are involved in producing meat. There's a relationship with animals. There's many things that we don't do. And it's like, for example, being outside has health properties, being outside in nature. There's so many factors that contribute to working with nature, not just the fact that we eat the food. And this, to me, just removes all those things as well. We have a farmer here.
Well, I was going to say, Lefty, what have you actually got on your farm?
That's we're a mixed farm. Well, even the vegetables have a life of a form. But we have poultry, sheep, turkeys, geese coming up to Christmas. But my question would be, in terms of the flavour of the meat, leaving aside the ethical considerations, which I agree with you fully on what you're saying there, in terms of the flavour, the best flavour with meat comes from the pasture, the time spent on the range. Can you equal that?
Ultimately, a lot of meat consumption is about volume. So you look at the beef burger, the lasagna, the chicken nugget. And perhaps those that do eat these products, they're not concerned primarily
with flavour.
Not concerned with flavour. We taint it with garlic and onions and chili and ginger, etc. And for me, British farmers, Argentinian farmers, Australia, the grass-reared, grass-finished beef is the best in the world. And actually, for me, in vitro beef or in vitro meat is actually only going to benefit premium farmers because actually people appreciate the quality of the products they produce. It'll also take some of the pressure off the farmers.
We should point out that you're not cooking it in your restaurant in Cornwall at the moment.
No, it's a little bit cost prohibitive.
Because a piece that's the one you tasted.
Yeah, so the last piece I cooked
about
cost,
that size.
Yeah, about 330,000 euros. So let's say 300,000 pounds, and I need to make a healthy.
So can you ever see it? Can you ever see it becoming cost effective? I mean, that's one consideration is the current cost, and they're saying it's coming down, but we're talking ridiculous prices. But once you roll that out into larger scale production, you bring in the same sort of factory processes of production. That are linked to things like industrial farming and have the same sort of effects on the environment. So wouldn't this just be the wrong solution?
We're all changing.
We're all changing. Sorry, can I add one other? Who actually is going to own this meat? Is it going to be a big American technology company? Is it going to be the farmer? Who is it? It's going to be patented. It's going to have, we could end up with our food effectively being owned by 3 or 4 people, a bit like the world technology today. And this is a terribly dangerous road we're going down. This is just right at the very, very start.
Well, let's talk about the bigger picture now, rather than the lab-grown meat, rather than slab-grown or whatever, but the in vitro. But let's move away from that to the way the world is changing. Do our food habits have to continue to change because we can't carry on as we are?
I think we're all beginning to adopt a Western diet. That's what really frightens me. Is that China, India, countries, vast countries which never really had meat as their base of their diet, are now turning to chicken and to pork and to beef. And the pressure this.
Well, in the introduction that you gave, you said that meat consumption per capita has doubled. Meat production has is 6 times now more than what it was 30 or 40 years ago, but consumption per capita has doubled. So if we changed our dietary habits backwards, this is per capita, not just the add-on from the developed world coming online. Per capita, we're eating twice as much as we used to. So there's no need for that consumption. That's all to do with the way that industrial food is marketed.
Yeah.
If we reduce that, we could cut back to half the requirement in one
why
stroke.
do we need to? Other than perhaps some people might say for health reasons, but why?
It's not sustainable. The food system that we exist, 48% of our food is imported. So that the air miles, the effect on the chemicals that are used to produce, to rear the animals, all these things have a knock-on effect, as you mentioned before as well, and accumulatively, like the Vitro, it may not be imminent, it might not be immediate, but 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, we're going to see the effects of that as well. For example, the soil, we're having a massive problem with the soil. It's been completely eroded.
I don't think we need the discussion on the environmental impacts. We clearly are in an era where the environmental impacts of industrial farming processes, not just the welfare issues, but the pollution coming from factory farming and from these massive stock farms, beef, cattle
pollution
breeding.
Ultimately that justifies in vitro beef.
No, it doesn't,
meat.
because we're just saying if we ever raised it to that level of production where it could actually displace industrial farming, it would bring its own industrial problems.
But it's more efficient.
But no,
you've got a good point. I mean,
It's over 1,000 times more efficient than meat production.
30% of all our cereal, 90% of all our soya,
Yeah.
all that land being used goes to meat.
Yeah.
And effectively, you're saying, we've got another 3 billion people coming along, and they're going to need to be fed.
You need
and at the moment, the only option is to cut down more
7
forests.
grams of soil or vegetation to produce 1 gram of meat.
Yeah.
On
So, but
top
why
of
go down?
25
Why go
litres
down
of water.
imitating the meat route when you can go the vegetarian route? I mean, I don't know.
It's
Vegan
tackling the problem from the wrong side.
Exactly.
It's typical of the modern world in that we see a problem and we fix it through another one that brings inherent problems further down the line.
Yeah, but the thing is, you've got to convince people, haven't you? I mean,
well, that's what we do. We specialise.
How do you convince people to stop eating meat?
Well, this is what we specialise in doing. We make a point of making it. We don't force the issue onto people. We work with a lot of people that work in inner city environments, and what we try to do is we do 2 things. We make it attractive, we make it appealing, we educate them. We also make it sexy, and also with the vegan food. A lot of vegan food culturally is just kind of devoid of flavour. It's tasteless, it's bland. So the young children that we work with, they don't want to eat it. So what we do is make a point of actually making it really flavoursome, make it really interesting. Sometimes we cook with meat, and then we do the equivalent recipe with next week with vegetarian or the vegan option.
And writing songs about it.
Of course, we make songs.
Go on.
So my latest track, so my latest track is it's called No Meat, No Bones, No Blood. And so no meat, no bones, no blood, making my spirituality grow. As the world does shift, our minds expand. We become more in tune with the land. Reasons for eat meat not justified. A healthy diet of flesh, say they lied. Cruelty to animals, the scale surpassed. Death from sad diet from an all-time high. Call out and Matt Murdoch, the V way of life, feed the world over.
Fantastic.
Come on,
Thank you
come
very much. I
on.
think I should go like that.
You might not get stream cred, but you can do it.
It's a beautiful song about in vitro meat. No bones, no blood.
Before you became an organic farmer, when you were an academic, you talked about nomads.
Yeah.
And where does that fit into the big picture?
Well, that sort of
in
inspired
Africa in
me,
particular?
and it's lovely to hear what you're saying, because that connection with the land, I think it goes beyond whether we're eating meat or not and what's on your plate. It's a whole connection with the environment and a relationship with the world, and this brings in welfare. But and we do try and recreate that on our farm in terms of the way that we are handling the animals, but also the way we link to local community. But in my previous work at the university, I was working a lot with nomads in West Africa. Now, obviously, their environment is very different. Crops are not really not an option, except possibly seasonally. So most of their time is spent with the livestock, and they are dependent fully on the livestock. So to suggest that they could have a vegetarian diet would be ridiculous in that environment. So I think meat plays an important part in people's lifestyle, their diet, but also their culture. And it's that whole relationship. There's a lot to learn from that, connecting children to the land.
And let's not kid ourselves. There's some very good things about growing meat for farming. It's the waste from animals can be ploughed in. It's fantastically good for the soil.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of what you do, don't you?
That's
And also, animals consume an awful lot of the food which is left over from the vegetables, which we don't eat. So, in other words, they are part of the system as well. And most ancient traditions, as you know, do actually have some sort of meat farming in them.
Are you finding people's habits are changing? Because you see the customers, you see the
I do,
others.
yeah. weirdly, people's habits more change because of the imminent economy, and so things are quite buoyant now, even with the uncertainty going on in the world. So, if anything, people are eating more meat through the restaurant industry than previously. Whereas, let's give it a couple of years, or what we saw back in 2009. People attending restaurants, people eating meat actually dropped.
Do people go to your restaurant to eat your meat? Is that
Yeah, I live in a beautiful fishing village.
Oh, we can give it a name check. Polperra.
Polperra, beautiful fishing village.
And the name is?
Polperra, and the restaurant, Cooch's Great House restaurant.
But is meat an extravagance then? I mean,
it is a luxury, and I personally feel it should be treated as a luxury. There's an awful lot of hard work. There's, for an animal, for a beef, there's 30 months, traditionally of hard work, care, attention. Living outside in the land, working with the animals. We then select the appropriate abattoir where the stress levels are really low. We send it to a very skilled butcher that perhaps trained for 50 years. We hang it for another 28, 30 days, 32 days. So it comes to the kitchen and, it's not just the work that I do on a daily basis. There's 3, 4 other individuals before it's got to me. So I should treat it with care and luxury, because if I don't, it's all that hard work gone out the window, and that for me is why meat still is a luxury.
But you can charge 40, 50 bucks for a plate.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's fully justified. Like I say, I think farmers should be.
That would be one way of tackling it.
Now, not just us, but the world is having this conversation.
Yeah, but I find it really interesting that you've talked about you can afford a customer to pay 40, 50 pounds when we've got people on a council estate that can't even afford a decent meal.
Exactly. No,
So
but sorry, we've got customers coming to us. We sell to a lot of our community are not very well off. Because we're doing a high quality chicken, it's not the sort of thing that your kids are walking down the high streets buying for 20 pence, but their family are buying a quality chicken. They're making it last, they're making a good healthy meal out of that, and they're having it as a sort of special meal once or twice a week. I think that's what we need to look at. And you were saying,
I used to always boil up my chicken, not cartons at the end of Sunday lunch. Make wonderful soup out of it.
Yeah. One good meat dish a month, and you can live off that for a week at least. And you don't need. We do not need meat as we did before.
But ironically, we find that we're eating less meat on the farm as a family.
Really?
Since we started farming animals. But that's because
we're worried about killing them, or
no? It's because we're respecting the meat we have. We know we're looking after them, but also because we're growing a lot of vegetables in harmony with what we're producing in terms of the animals. And those vegetables taste great because we're realizing what vegetables can taste like. A lot of people are so distant from real
like,
veg
for example,
picked from their own garden and prepared.
Vitro meat. What about mushrooms? Mushrooms are one of the most advanced species we have, one of the most oldest species we have, and it can replace any kind of meat product we have. But you don't hear the inclusion of meat in no one talks about mushrooms in the same way that they talk about Vitro meat.
I think that's just eating cultures, though. I think if you look at particularly in France, it's quite commonplace for a simple roasted cep to be the focal point of the dinner. Roasted cep with butternut squash. It's one of the most beautiful things you'll actually dine and eat. And
but it's
charge
culturally we want the meat. I mean, where's the beef? That's the question.
But that's imposed on us, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, the McDonald's culture that we now have.
Do you think it's imposed by the conglomerates, or do you think it's imposed by a history of it? It's something special. Now we can have more of it. We should eat more of it.
We look at these beautiful medieval feasts, and there'd be 7 or 8 different meats, on the table with, an individual carving across a grand table. It's in all the art galleries across London, and you see these grand scenes. And meat's there. It's layered subconsciously through history.
As a sign of the times, I saw that McDonald's is introducing a vegan burger. Can you imagine this? This is the total cultural.
I can't imagine what that would be.
Exactly, and how it's produced as well.
But would you eat that?
I wouldn't personally, because of the ethics of McDonald's and how they produce meat. I don't know fully, but one of my tracks, I'm actually questioning, how the meat is produced from McDonald's. So I don't personally. It's fast food. I think it's also not about fast food. It's about good food. Yeah. And actually, the relationship. I'm not actually against people eating meat. It's the way it's distributed, it's the way it's harnessed. I think, you mentioned biodiversity. It's such an important part of the world. I wouldn't tell someone, for example, who lives in the Arctic not to eat meat, because actually that is their whole ecosystem, their whole life.
You can't grow too many vegetables.
Exactly, as well. But I think here in the West, we do have more choice, and actually I think we have more of a responsibility because of the amount of waste we produce. I was really pleased to hear that the farming that you do, because actually it's mixed farming. There's like permaculture, there's different ways you can introduce farming. I think the problem is...
What do you mean by permaculture?
So permaculture is a technique that works with the land. as opposed to against it. What we tend to do, we always focus ourselves as human beings at the top of the food chain, and that's a consumer-led model. Once you have that, you're never going to have sustainable models of food, and that's what I'm questioning a lot more as well.
There's a big debate about the emissions from animals and sort of CO2 emissions and climate changing emissions, and it's a serious problem. I mean, there's been more than 10%, 15%. People can't quite agree, but the point is it's very significant, and maybe.
And this is where we talked about the end of the world, perhaps, because
as climate change warms
we
up,
all know the apocryphal story of the dinosaurs.
The muted figure is 15% currently of the world's greenhouse gases. This actually comes from the methane byproduct of beef production.
Yeah, that's important.
And it's actually more than the whole of the transport industry. So we look at current change, all the electric vehicles now that are coming out. There's an organisation or a collective set of minds that's saying, right, we want to reduce diesel and unleaded fuel consumption. We'll look at electric. And now this is basically the beginning of the food industry to say, right, now it's time for us to put our hands up and say, let's take some responsibility. This is the beginning of change.
Which brings us to you on the production side of things. How would you advise other people to take this movement, if you like, forward?
Yeah, well, I think that's where the change has to come, because I think the idea of in vitro is nice, but as a speciality dish. But when we're talking about consumption patterns, for example, in the West, I think reaching something like 90 kilos per capita, whereas across much of the developing world, it's still around 5 kilos per capita. So we know where the blame and the fault lies, and it is very much the industrial farming processes. By and large, traditional farming has been removed, and it's in traditional farming that you actually have the answer to these problems. So we can certainly reduce consumption massively, and then we can tackle it also in terms of the production techniques.
But farming doesn't make you a lot of money anyway. I don't know. I mean, people say, but you never find a poor farmer. But that's not the case. It's very difficult to get money in your hands. So how do you stop people using these industrialized methods?
It's education. I mean, we find with the customers that are coming to us, we're educating the families. The children are coming to the farms as well, and it's a question of educating them to realise that their diet needs to change. I mean, related to this overconsumption, we mustn't forget, is the massive environmental problem, massive health problems increasing. I mean, all of these things are linked to the overconsumption.
Well, I did a story in India about obesity.
Okay, and that's now spreading. It's rippling out from the first world. So if we really want to tackle the real problems, we have to say it's overconsumption. You start head on with overconsumption. And that would then be related to price. We could then shut down a lot of the fast food production because we could tax it for the real environmental damage it does.
But I think there's also a whole movement of young people, especially from the age of 12, 13 upwards, going vegan, going vegetarian. And part of it, I mean, it's all ethical, but so much of it is linked to the treatment of animals. Animals have been treated so appallingly. And people are understanding that now much, much more than they ever did. So I think
which is the conversation I referred to.
It's a huge conversation. Yeah, I mean, your children, everybody.
We never had it in my family when I was growing up.
Exactly. You eat this meat. You enjoy it.
Yeah, but it's also a disconnect, just not with meat, but also with food as a whole. Like we do, like for example, do apple pressing. We make potatoes, and they don't even know where chips come from. They don't understand that this relationship. That there's a massive disconnect. We talked about this consumer model. We're so used to just purchasing stuff. We don't have no buying. There's no time.
Blame the supermarkets. They always get the blame.
I think it's easy to blame, but I think there's also about take some responsibility. Like you said, like what's our solution?
And how many articles will you see saying in vitro is the future? It can solve our problems, but very few say actually the solution is cut eating your meat. Have a bit more traditional,
more localized
responsbility, as you say, for what we're eating and what we're producing.
And we should also
not blaming you for in vitro.
This little bit, $300,000. You tell me that you could, from one little stem cell, you could get a ton of in vitro meat.
The projections currently, in 10 years' time, one stem cell could produce a ton of protein. Meat protein or fish protein currently, which is phenomenal.
We're pretty much coming to the end of the programme. But I just want some final conclusions.
We can keep going.
We can do it afterwards.
For me, I think the summary, we slate the technology companies, governments or large supermarkets, etc. But currently, recently, you're seeing the Chinese government investing $300 million into in vitro meat. And that shows that they're actually, for a change, putting their hands up, taking some responsibility, because 1.4 billion people in China are now eating meat, which didn't happen 30 years ago. So there's an ever-growing problem, but it's the beginning of a solution. I think, for me, that's probably the most interesting and current topic that we can talk about.
Cheered by what you've heard?
Yeah, in particular. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's good to have the debate, but I suppose for me, we always try to, as human beings, we always try to play God. And we have a system called nature, which has been here a lot longer than us and is much more scientifically advanced than any laboratory, but yet we try to replicate, you know, laboratory kind of forms of technology. And I just think actually if we use more natural techniques, mixed farming, permaculture, localized, we'd have a much more secure food system and we'd have much healthier people in society.
The technology is wondrous, but it's basically going in the wrong direction. I think it's completely, this is technology for the few, by the few, and it's the many are not going to benefit very much from it.
And I should say, I don't know whether you all know this, but this is a farming accident.
Yeah,
Health problems of having sheep on your farm.
Sheep.
I don't think it bit you. I think
No, it didn't.
I,
But
think you banged it
I
somewhere.
scratched myself, but yes.
Blood, sweat and tears for dinner tonight.
There you go, that's what it's about.
Thank you all
Thank you
very,
much.
very much
Thank you.
indeed. We've been talking about a much loved food, much loved by many, not everybody at this table. Perhaps difficult for a lot of people to give up. Perhaps time though to consider the environment more than our taste buds, although for some that might prove hard to swallow. This has been Roundtable. I'm David Foster. From me and the rest of the team, thanks for watching. Hope you tune in next time. Bye-bye for now.